Hi, my name is Evelyn Brooks, 29 years old, and I will never forget my sister's graduation party at the Franklin Rooftop Restaurant in Philadelphia. There were only 50 guests, yet that moment became the talk of the entire city. While raising a glass for a toast, my mother took the microphone, smiled at the crowd, then turned to me and said, "Evelyn, hand your sister the keys to the Penthouse in Boston. She deserves to begin her new life there." I froze. When I calmly replied, "No," the room exploded. My mother lost control. She slapped me so hard that my diamond earring flew off and rolled across the marble floor. No one dared breathe. I simply picked it up, offered my sister a quick congratulations, and walked out. One phone call. 1 hour later, the banquet doors opened, and when that man walked in, my mother screamed so loud the entire building could hear. Before we dive into this story, please like and subscribe if you truly care about the journeys of setting boundaries within your own family. Where are you watching from? Share your city and current time in the comments below. I had arrived in Philadelphia the night before, choosing a small hotel near campus so I could get there early the next morning and avoid any mishaps. The city in May, filled with graduation energy, had a completely different buzz from usual. Streets were crowded with students in black gowns and square caps, holding white lilies or bright red roses. I had prepared a bouquet of rare purple orchids, Sophie's favorite since childhood, along with a handwritten card and a discreet envelope containing a check for $25,000. I knew money could never replace family love, but it was my way of supporting her dream of graduate school, a practical help so she wouldn't have to struggle with loans the way I once did. As I walked into the ceremony area, I saw the entire Brooks family already gathered. My mother, Carol, wore a pale beige dress, her face glowing as she chatted with other parents, endlessly repeating how Sophie was about to become an elementary school teacher and the perfect American daughter with a gentle heart. My father, Richard, was shaking hands with old acquaintances from the construction industry, proudly telling anyone who would listen that Sophie had chosen a stable, traditional path and would soon settle down with a family of her own. When I approached, they looked at me with a brief hesitation, as if my presence was only the backdrop for the real star of the day. My mother glanced at the navy blue business dress I had chosen, frowned slightly, and half joked, half scolded, "You always look like you're going to a meeting. This is your sister's special day, couldn't you wear something softer?" I smiled, swallowed my reply, and handed Sophie the bouquet. Sophie, radiant in her bright red graduation gown, gave me a quick, awkward hug. She thanked me, but almost immediately turned back to her friends for cap and gown photos, leaving me standing with our parents. From the relatives nearby, I heard the familiar whispers. "Evelyn is always so busy. How old is she now, and still not married? A career is fine, but a woman needs a home to be complete." Those words were nothing new. In the Brooks family, every achievement of mine, from business trips across Asia to multi-million-dollar contracts to the penthouse I had spent years saving for, was always reduced to one flaw. I had new husband, new children. After the formal ceremony, the group moved on to the Franklin rooftop, where the family had rented the entire space for the celebration. The atmosphere on the terrace was unmistakably American. White tablecloths, a buffet of sliders, fried chicken, mixed salads, champagne, and mocktails for the fresh graduates. About 50 guests filled the space, mostly Sophie's friends, teachers, and a handful of my parents' business partners. As glasses were raised in her honor, every conversation circled back to Sophie's bright future, her teaching job at the local elementary school, her dream of starting a family, the suburban house with the white picket fence. I sat at the table quietly, listening, and felt the picture they painted so vividly. It was a picture where I simply did not exist. I tried to blend in, asking a few polite questions about the speeches, snapping a couple of photos for keepsake, but the contrast was still glaring. My mother boasted to the guests about Sophie volunteering at the children's hospital, while my father spoke proudly about the ring her boyfriend would soon give her. When it came to me, they brushed past with a vague line. "The eldest is still in Boston, working, something in investments. They deliberately pretended not to know that I was serving as vice president of global partnerships at a leading fund, directly overseeing transcontinental infrastructure projects. To them, that career was just a distant detail, nothing worth parading the way Sophie's so-called perfect milestones were. As everyone raised their glasses to Sophie, I gazed out at Philadelphia stretching wide under the early summer Sunday. I chose a table near the balcony, telling myself I would keep things light and graceful. But then, in the moment I stood up to straighten a tilted vase, I accidentally overheard my parents in the corner. Their voices were hushed, yet clear enough for every word to strike me. My father said, "We'll announce it during the toast. The guests are expecting a surprise, and nothing could top revealing that Evelyn will hand over her penthouse keys to Sophie as she starts her new chapter." Oh, what? I froze, gripping the vase as though it were the only thing keeping me from collapsing. My mother replied with unwavering certainty. She won't dare refuse. In front of 50 guests, on her sister's big day, she won't risk being called selfish. She might be stubborn at work or in business meetings, but in this family, she's still afraid of losing face. Tonight, she'll have no choice but to obey. My father chuckled softly, as if the two of them had just devised a brilliant move. They were utterly convinced I would smile, nod, and turn 10 years of my hard work into a gift to polish the family's perfect image. I stood there frozen, my breathing heavy. A part of me wanted to rush out and confront them on the spot, but reason told me I needed to stay calm. I had grown far too familiar with these subtle tactics of coercion. The only difference this time was that they had gone too far. For the first time, I saw with absolute clarity that they regarded me as nothing more than a piece on their chessboard, a tool to construct Sophie's perfect story, with no regard for whether I agreed or not. I returned to my table, forcing a composed expression while a storm raged inside me. Thankfully, my best friend Maya was also at the party. She wasn't just the college friend who had walked beside me all these years, but also a freelance journalist with the habit of always carrying a small camera. When I quickly told her what I had just overheard, Maya's eyes sharpened instantly. She pulled the camera from her purse, checked the battery and memory card, then gave me a firm nod. "I'll record everything. If they try to trap you in front of the crowd, you'll need proof to protect yourself." I looked at Maya, overwhelmed with gratitude. In that moment, I knew I wasn't completely alone. As the guests began to settle into their seats and servers moved between tables with trays of drinks, I could feel my parents' orchestration in every detail. My mother moved confidently through the crowd, her eyes gleaming with anticipation as she prepared for her big reveal. My father stood near the microphone, speaking with the restaurant manager to ensure his remarks would echo across the rooftop. I realized then this was not some impulsive gesture, but a carefully staged plan. They had deliberately chosen Sophie's graduation party as their stage, convinced that I would never dare embarrass the family in front of her friends, professors, and the business partners they had invited. I thought back to all the times in the past when I had been forced into silence. At birthdays and family gatherings, my parents would tell stories that made me seem small, from mocking me as difficult to dismissing me as someone who only ever cared about work. I used to smile and endure it so as not to ruin the atmosphere. But this time, everything was different. They weren't just belittling me with words, they were planning to strip away the greatest achievement I had sacrificed sleep and meals to earn. The penthouse was not just a home. It was proof of my identity, a fortress against all the comparisons and belittlement. And they thought I would let it go so easily. Maya sat beside me, pretending to check her phone while discreetly adjusting the lens of her camera. She whispered, "Don't react too soon, let them expose themselves. You need them to spell it out in front of everyone." I gave a subtle nod, feeling my heartbeat pound in my chest. I knew that moment would come when the entire rooftop would turn its eyes on me, waiting for my response. But this time, I was ready. I was no longer the girl who bowed her head under ridicule. I was the woman who had endured 10 years of battles, who had built her own boundaries, and I was prepared to defend them to the very end. As the soft jazz music faded to make way for the speeches, I sat up straight, my eyes fixed on my parents. They had no idea that every word and every action from this point forward was being recorded. Beneath the table, I clenched my fists and told myself that tonight might strip away the last illusion I had about family, but it would also mark the moment I proved that no one would ever decide for me again. And if they believed I would crumble under pressure, they were about to meet a very different Evelyn. The clinking of a spoon against a champagne glass rang out, quickly silencing the entire rooftop. My father stood tall, raising his glass high as if he were the centerpiece of the evening, while behind him the sun slipped below the Philadelphia skyline, streaks of orange and red reflecting off the glass towers. I watched as my mother stepped up beside him, gripping the microphone with eager anticipation, and Sophie, in her simple white graduation dress, stood close, her face glowing with joy. The guests sat with glasses in hand, waiting for an important announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen," my father began, his voice deep and steady. "Today is not only the day Sophie graduates, but also the beginning of a new chapter in her life. Our family has always believed that success is meant to be shared, and happiness shines brightest when it is doubled. That is why we are so proud to announce that our eldest daughter, Evelyn, has decided to gift her sister the keys to her Boston Seaport penthouse, so Sophie can start this next stage of her journey." For a moment, the rooftop erupted in applause and gasps. I heard the clear wow from the table behind me, and one of Sophie's professors exclaimed, "That's incredible, truly the model of sisterhood." Sophie's eyes shimmered as she placed both hands over her chest, as though she couldn't believe it, but I caught the faint, triumphant smile at the corner of her lips, a smile only I could recognize. My mother wrapped her arm around Sophie, repeating over and over, "See? You are the luckiest one. Your sister always thinks of you." A few guests wiped away emotional tears, while cameras and phones shot up to capture this so-called golden moment. I sat frozen, the glass in my hand trembling slightly. In my mind, the words I had overheard echoed again. "She won't dare refuse." They had calculated everything too carefully. They had staged an entire play, witnesses, guests, and a grand setting. They believed I would be forced to smile, step forward, hand over the keys, and remain silent while the story of the older sister sacrificing for the younger etched itself into the memories of the 50 people present. They believed I would repeat my old habit, endure quietly, never cause a scene. But no. This time, I would not allow anyone to cross my boundaries. I set the glass down on the table and stood up straight. The screech of the chair legs against the stone floor cut through the noise. Instantly, every pair of eyes turned toward me. I walked slowly to the front, each step deliberate, as if I were entering a boardroom where millions of dollars hinged on my decision. When I reached my parents, I stopped, choosing not to take the microphone, letting my voice carry clearly on its own. "I'm sorry, but I never agreed to that." The air shattered into heavy silence. Applause died mid-clap, a few glasses froze halfway to lips. I saw frowns, puzzled stares. My father blinked, his face tightening before he forced a smile and lifted the microphone. "She's just being modest, everyone. Evelyn has always been humble, never one for attention, but the decision has been made. She will hand over the penthouse." "Dad." I cut him off, my voice low and firm this time. "I never agreed. The penthouse is mine, and I have no intention of giving it to anyone." 2. The whispers spread like ripples. I heard the murmurs. "What? She refused? No way, on her sister's graduation day? How selfish." Sophie's eyes welled up with tears right on cue, and she let out a fragile sob. "Sister, I thought you loved me." My mother immediately snatched the microphone from my father, her eyes flashing with both anger and embarrassment. "This is your sister's day, Evelyn. Don't be selfish. This is a family gift, and all you need to do is hand it over." I kept my gaze steady, my voice unwavering. "If it's a family gift, then the family should buy it for her. That penthouse was earned by me, not by anyone else." Gasps echoed across the rooftop. An elderly woman at a nearby table pressed her hand to her chest as if struck. Someone muttered, "How ungrateful." Another man whispered, "Does she really think she's above everyone else just because of one apartment?" I could feel the pressure of dozens of eyes, the sting of whispered judgment piercing my skin like needles. But I stood tall, my hands relaxed at my sides, my voice even and calm. Sophie cried louder, covering her face, drawing a few of her friends to rush over and comfort her. My mother glared at me, her face flushed red, her voice hissing through the microphone. "Daughter, don't disgrace this family. That apartment is just bricks and concrete. Your sister's happiness matters far more." I let out a cold laugh, enunciating each word clearly. If my sister's happiness depends on taking away someone else's hard-earned achievement, then perhaps we need to reconsider what happiness really means. Gasps erupted again, some guests shaking their heads in disbelief, others looking at me with a mix of shock and admiration. Sweat began to bead on my father's forehead as he leaned into the microphone, his voice tight. "Evelyn, don't turn your sister's big day into a tragedy. You can afford another apartment. Don't be selfish." I met his eyes squarely and replied with calm finality. "Then you can buy her one." "I won't." That moment exploded like a bomb. A young woman at the back table blurted out, "Oh my God." An older man grimaced as if he had just witnessed a forbidden act. Maya's camera stayed steady, recording everything in silence. I knew I had just shattered the script my parents had so carefully prepared, turning what was meant to be a graduation celebration into the stage for the most public confrontation we had ever faced. But I also knew that this time, there was no way back, and I didn't need one. Through my mother's furious glare, the guests' stunned expressions, and Sophie's theatrical sobs, I stood at the very center of the storm. And strangely enough, I felt calm. Because for the first time, I was no longer letting them decide for me. I had said no, and that refusal rang louder than any applause or praise could have in that room. In the split second after my words, my mother's face shifted rapidly from rage to confusion, then to something closer to despair tinged with hatred. She no longer looked like the composed hostess trying to salvage the family's dignity, but like a mother ready to use whatever force necessary to bend her daughter's will. I saw her slam the microphone down onto the table, stride across the short distance with sharp heels striking against the rooftop tiles. And then, before I could react, her hand struck across my cheek with such force that my whole body tilted sideways. The sound of the slap cracked like a gunshot. It didn't just sting against my skin, it echoed through the microphone someone had left on, amplified by the restaurant's sound system. A sharp clang followed as my left diamond earring flew off, spinning in the air before hitting the cold stone floor, rolling once before lying still, its facets scattering light under the rooftop stage lamps. In that instant, the silence was so absolute I could hear the wind slipping through the railings and the faint clink of a glass trembling on the nearest table. 50 guests sat frozen, holding their breath all at once. Some stared wide-eyed in horror, while a few women raised their hands to cover their mouths. My father stood in shock, as though he couldn't believe his wife had actually done what had just unfolded before him. Sophie burst into tears, but this time it wasn't part of some rehearsed act, it sounded like genuine fear at how far things had spiraled. And me? My cheek burned hot, my skin flushed red, yet inside I felt strangely hollow. I didn't tremble, and I didn't cry. Time seemed to stop for a few suspended seconds, leaving me with only one choice. Stay calm. I slowly lifted my hand to my cheek, feeling the sting of my mother's palm still imprinted there. Then I bent down, taking deliberate steps toward the earring on the ground. My heels struck the stone floor in steady rhythm, each click reverberating in the tense stillness like a blade cutting through the air. I picked up the earring, brushed off an invisible speck of dust, and carefully fastened it back onto my ear. The movement took less than a minute, but to everyone watching, it stretched into an eternity. When I straightened up, my eyes locked on my mother. I saw her hand still clenched, trembling slightly. Her gaze no longer carried triumph but confusion laced with fear, as if realizing she had crossed a line that could never be undone. I drew in a deep breath, steadying my rhythm again, and allowed myself the faintest smile so subtle it was nearly invisible, but one I kept solely for myself. I turned toward my sister, my voice calm as it carried through the silence. Congratulations, Sophie. I hope today's degree leads you to a future you truly want. Just one short sentence, no more, no less, but I knew it was enough to show that I wouldn't let this humiliation turn me into someone bitter. I still held on to the bare minimum of grace, something my parents had long since abandoned. Then I turned my back and walked straight out of the party. Chairs scraped against the floor behind me, murmurs rising as voices returned. I caught fragments. Unbelievable. In front of everyone. What kind of mother hits her daughter like that? This will spread for sure. But I didn't look back, and I didn't slow down. My steps were steady, like leaving a boardroom after delivering the final word. As my hand touched the glass door leading to the stairwell, I heard my father shout desperately, "Evelyn, wait." But I didn't turn around. I pushed the door open, cutting off the noise behind me as it closed, leaving only the night wind of Philadelphia sweeping through the corridor. I touched my cheek, still stinging, yet inside a strange calm rose within me. Because I knew that slap hadn't broken me. It had marked a boundary, proof that I was right to build walls of my own. I pulled my phone from my clutch, the screen lighting up with a familiar name. I pressed call, and when the deep, steady voice answered on the other end, I spoke just 3 words. Green light, now. Now. I left the rooftop in silence, my footsteps on the stairs beating like drums announcing a new chapter. The Philadelphia night wind slipped through my hair, carrying the damp scent of the Delaware River. I called a car, slid into the back seat, and shut the door tight. Only when the car rolled past the bright streets did I let myself exhale a long, steady breath. My cheek still burned, the mark of my mother's slap vivid on my skin, but the real pain was inside. A public betrayal, in front of 50 people, by those who were supposed to protect me. When the car stopped at the hotel, I walked into the lobby composed, nodding to the familiar front desk staff. I didn't want anyone to think I had just weathered a storm. In my room, I locked the door, slipped off my heels, set my clutch on the table, and immediately took out my phone. My fingers tightened around the screen as I pulled up the number for Jonathan Hale, my mentor, my boss, and one of the few people I trust completely. After a single ring, he picked up, his voice calm and deep. "Evelyn?" I didn't waste words. "Green light, activate the clause now." On the other end, Jonathan asked nothing further. "I've been waiting for this call. Aisha is at the office, she'll send the notice within 10 minutes. Are you all right?" I pressed an ice pack from the minibar to my cheek and drew a steady breath. "I'm fine, but we need to move quickly. They tried to force a transfer in front of a crowd. We have witnesses, and we have video." I heard keyboard keys from Jonathan's side before he continued. "Perfect. Clause 12.4 inches. The indemnity agreement allows us to treat any attempt at coerced transfer as a breach. I'll use this covenant to freeze any effort to take possession." And in less than 5 minutes, an email arrived from Aisha Khan, the fund's chief counsel. Subject line, Notice of Protective Covenant Activation. Immediate effect. The body was concise and precise, citing the relevant provisions and stating, "Any attempt to coerce or pressure Miss Evelyn Brooks into transferring ownership of the property is hereby null and void. All rights remain exclusively with her." Attached was a digitally stamped PDF, sent directly to the Brooks & Sons Company inbox and to my father's personal address I had provided earlier. I knew that within minutes, Richard Brooks would open the email and feel his heart drop to his stomach. Aisha called on video right after, her face lighting up on the screen, hair neatly tied back, glasses catching the glow of her computer monitor. "Evelyn, I just sent the notice. I also drafted a cease and desist in case they continue making false public claims. If necessary, we can request a temporary protective order from the local court within 24 hours. I nodded. "Do it. Tonight they crossed a line. I want this handled not just within the family, but legally as well. They need to understand this is no longer some family drama." Jonathan's voice came in, steady and commanding. "Evelyn, you're not just protecting yourself. You're sending a message to everyone who thinks blood ties or social pressure give them the right to take what someone else has earned. You did the right thing. And you are not alone. Hearing those words, I felt a weight lift from my chest. I leaned back in the chair, letting the ice pack slip from my cheek and drop onto the tablecloth. I stood, opened my laptop, and connected to the hotel's network. I forwarded Aisha the clip Maya had recorded, showing my father's declaration, "Evelyn has agreed to give the penthouse," and my public refusal. The sharp crack of my mother's slap echoed through the audio, the diamond earring falling and catching the light on the stone floor like undeniable evidence. Aisha needed only a few seconds to watch before she said, "Excellent. This video doesn't just prove coercion, it also documents physical assault. If necessary, we can sue for assault. But for now, let me keep it as our trump card." Meanwhile, Jonathan texted me, "I'll be at the rooftop within an hour. I'm bringing 2 attorneys and a PR specialist. Rest for now, but be prepared. When I walk in, the balance of power will shift." I stared at those words, my heartbeat quickening not from fear, but from hope. I knew my parents were used to holding control. They believed the eyes of the community, the weight of collective pressure, would be enough to break me. But what they didn't know was that this time, I had the law and an entire corporation standing behind me. I sat at the table, opened my jewelry box, and removed the diamond earrings, placing them neatly on the silk cloth. One carried a tiny scratch from the fall, yet its light still glittered. I whispered, "They can't take this from me." Then I drew a long breath and typed a message to Maya. "Thank you for recording. Keep the original safe. We're going to need it soon." She replied instantly, "Don't worry, friend. I've already uploaded a copy to the cloud. No one can erase it." Outside the window, Philadelphia's lights flickered like thousands of eyes watching. I sipped a glass of cold water, steadying myself. I knew the next hour would be decisive. When Jonathan Hale stepped into that party, everything would change. And for the first time, my parents would have to face not only me, the daughter they had dismissed, but also the legal and financial consequences of their actions. Back at the Franklin rooftop, the atmosphere had grown suffocating after my departure. Guests were still murmuring, whispers laced with unease. Sophie sat at the main table, dabbing her tears as friends tried to comfort her, while my father struggled to maintain composure and keep the evening alive. My mother stood off to the side, her face flushed red, breathing uneven. She forced a strained smile at the guests, but everyone had seen what happened. And then, at that very moment, the tall glass doors to the rooftop swung open. Jonathan Hale stepped in tall, broad-shouldered, his dark gray tailored suit and sharp navy tie radiating authority. Beside him walked Aisha Khan in a black suit, carrying a thick case file, and a younger attorney holding a box stamped with the Hale Ridge Capital logo. Their footsteps struck the stone floor in steady rhythm, pulling the eyes of all 50 guests toward the door. No one knew who he was, but the presence and quiet confidence he carried silenced the entire rooftop. Jonathan didn't rush. He walked deliberately to the center, nodding politely to a few nearby guests before taking the microphone from the sound table. His voice carried deep and clear. "Apologies for the interruption. My name is Jonathan Hale, managing partner of Hale Ridge Capital. Perhaps many of you don't know this, but my firm maintains close relations with Brooks and Sons Construction and with Evelyn Brooks." The mention of my name sent a ripple through the room. Sophie lifted her head, her face pale. My father shot up from his chair, eyes wide. "You? What are you doing here?" Jonathan simply raised a hand, signaling Richard to be silent. He continued, his tone calm yet razor-sharp. "I am here because tonight, in this very place, an act occurred that is not only morally wrong but also legally actionable. I am speaking of the attempt to coerce Evelyn into publicly surrendering her Boston penthouse, her lawful property, as some sort of family gift. You all witnessed it, and fortunately, we now have evidence." Aisha opened her case, producing several documents stamped in red, along with a tablet already cued to Maya's recording. My father's voice rang out from the speakers. "We are so proud to announce that Evelyn will hand over the penthouse keys to her sister. followed by my firm refusal, and then the unmistakable crack of my mother's slap. Some guests turned their heads away, unwilling to watch, while others shook their heads in disgust. Jonathan waited for the video to finish before speaking. In Evelyn's indemnity agreement with Hale Ridge Capital, there is a clause known as Protective Covenant 12.4. This clause clearly states, if any executive is coerced or subjected to public pressure to surrender assets included in their compensation package, such actions are immediately deemed void, and the company has the right to intervene to protect its employee. He raised the document high, the embossed seal catching the light. Under this clause, the Boston Penthouse remains the exclusive property of Evelyn Brooks. Any attempt at coercion just witnessed, no matter who it came from, is invalid and subject to legal review. The room was dead silent, each of his words cut through the air like a blade. A few guests lowered their eyes, ashamed for having applauded the so-called gift just minutes earlier. My father broke into a sweat, his mouth fumbling. You have no right to interfere in our family matters." Jonathan's gaze locked on him, eyes blazing. "Wrong. The moment you turned it into a public declaration, in front of dozens of witnesses. The moment you humiliated and assaulted a senior executive of my firm, it stopped being a family matter. This is now a legal matter, a matter of dignity, and more importantly, a matter of shareholder protection." No sooner had he finished than my mother let out a piercing scream. The cry ripped through the rooftop, echoing so violently that wine glasses on the tables trembled. She clutched her chest, her face drained of color. "No, impossible. She is my daughter. She has no right to defy her family. That apartment belongs to this family, to her sister. You cannot take it away from us." Her shriek was so sharp that some younger guests instinctively stepped back, while a waiter, startled, dropped an entire tray of glasses to the floor. Jonathan did not flinch, standing calm in the middle of the chaos. He lowered the microphone slightly, his voice firm and unyielding. "Mrs. Brooks, no one here is taking anything from anyone. There is only one truth. Evelyn purchased that penthouse with her own hard work. You struck your daughter in public, then tried to force her to surrender what she earned. That is not family love, that is coercion." Every eye in the room fixed on my mother, and for the first time, I saw her stripped of the proud composure she always carried. She trembled, stepped back, and screamed again as if to banish the truth. "She owes us. Without us raising her, she wouldn't have what she has today." But her words only fueled the guests' murmurs. A professor at the next table whispered, "Unbelievable. To treat your own child like this after her success." Another parent shook their head. "Shameful." Aisha stepped forward, placing the notice squarely on the main table, her voice cutting like steel. "From this moment on, any attempt to seize or publicly pressure Evelyn Brooks into transferring the penthouse will be treated as a violation of the law. We hold full evidence, witnesses, and binding clauses to bring this case before the court." I stood by the door, having returned after Jonathan's message, and watched the scene unfold. My mother buried her face in her hands, trembling under the weight of the whispers. My father stood frozen in place. Sophie collapsed into her chair, her expression hollow as every illusion of a sister's sacrifice dissolved into smoke. I stepped forward, my gaze sweeping across the guests before settling on my mother. And in that instant, I knew the balance of power in our family had shifted forever. My mother's piercing scream still echoed against the glass walls of the rooftop when Jonathan stepped forward and placed the microphone on the main table. He didn't need amplification, his deep, commanding voice cut through the murmurs with ease. "Enough," he said, each word striking like a hammer. "I am not here tonight to argue. I am here to set conditions, and the Brooks family must make a choice now." The space fell silent, every guest holding their breath. Jonathan turned directly to face my parents. "Richard, Carol, you publicly claimed ownership of an asset that does not belong to you. You attempted to use social pressure to coerce Evelyn into surrendering it. And worst of all, Carol, you physically assaulted your own daughter in front of 50 witnesses." He paused, letting the words settle like stones. I saw my father swallow hard, his once ruddy face turning pale, while my mother stood rigid, eyes wild, cornered like an animal with no way out. Jonathan opened the folder in his hand and drew out 3 documents. He laid them on the table, tapping each sheet slowly with his finger. I have 3 demands, and you have 48 hours to comply. 1. Issue a public apology to Evelyn, not just within the family, but to the community, the press, and your clients. 2. Formally acknowledge that the penthouse is Evelyn's lawful property and cease any attempt to seize or pressure her over it. 3. Immediately end all interference in her personal life and assets. If you fail, I will take the next steps. He raised his head, his gaze sharp as a blade, sweeping across the entire room. What do you mean by next steps? My father asked, his voice trembling, though he still tried to appear firm. Jonathan didn't hesitate. It means I will call an emergency meeting with the Brooks and Sons Board of Directors. I currently hold 38% of your shares. I have been waiting to see if you could uphold dignity and run this company responsibly. But after tonight, I have every reason to doubt your leadership, Richard. The board will vote no confidence, and I will make sure there are enough votes to remove you from your seat. The working capital for the Jersey Shore expansion project will be pulled immediately. And I will go public with the press, stating that your family's conduct tonight is the reason. Do you think your major clients will still want to work with you then? The room was so silent that the faint crack of a wineglass breaking under someone's grip rang clear. My father seemed to crumble, no longer shouting, only gasping for breath as he realized the game was slipping out of his hands. My mother was different. She clenched her teeth, her voice shrill and bitter. You cannot destroy a family over an apartment. Evelyn is my daughter. I have the right to tell her she should share with her sister. Jonathan turned squarely to her, his voice lowering but cutting sharper than steel. Wrong. You may be her mother, but you do not have the right to turn your daughter into a bank. You do not have the right to strike her when she refuses. You do not have the right to treat her success as an asset to be redistributed. Motherhood does not grant you the power to seize what is not yours. Tonight, you have lost the shield of the word family. What remains, madam, are your actions. And those actions, let me be clear, are wrongful. Guests began to murmur again. Some nodded in agreement, others shook their heads in disbelief. I stood silently, watching, my heart both heavy and strangely relieved. Heavy because my family was being laid bare without mercy, but relieved because at last, the truth was no longer hidden. My father turned to my mother, his voice hoarse. Carol, enough. We can't go on like this. He has the authority. He'll follow through. For the first time in my life, I saw real fear in his eyes, not fear of humiliation, but fear of losing the empire he had built. My mother snapped back. You're taking the word of an outsider? This is our daughter. No, Jonathan cut her off, his voice sharp as a blade. Evelyn is my partner. She is a vice president of international development, managing hundreds of millions of dollars, and the very reason my firm invested in Brooks and Sons. She is no longer the child you think you can mold. She is a leader. And you just publicly tried to steal her achievement. I watched my mother fall silent, her eyes darting around, searching for support among the guests only to find cold, unsympathetic stares. Her excuses only made her smaller. Jonathan snapped his folder shut, his tone final. You have 48 hours. If by then there is no public apology and a written acknowledgement, I will proceed exactly as I've stated. The board meeting will be called, funding will be withdrawn, and the media will hear every detail. The choice is yours. The air was suffocating. My father bowed his head, his shoulders trembling, while my mother bit her lip, speechless. Sophie sat frozen, her tears long dried, replaced by a stunned, hollow stare. Guests, professors, friends, neighbors all bore witness to the collapse of the so-called perfect family right before their eyes. When I left the rooftop, the cool hallway air hit my face like a dose of clarity. I knew this wasn't over, but at least I had reclaimed control. Minutes later, back in my hotel room, I received a message from Maya. The clip is online. There's no pulling it back now. I opened it and saw the exact moment my father proudly declared the Penthouse gift, my firm refusal, and the sharp crack of my mother's slap echoing clear. The flash of the diamond earring rolling across the floor lit the frame like a cinematic shot. The video was less than 3 minutes long, but its impact was immeasurable. In less than an hour, the video had been shared thousands of times. Sophie's friends, fresh graduates themselves, spread it with captions like, "When your family forces you to sacrifice everything for the golden child right at her graduation party." Then it spread into Philadelphia community groups, and from there to the university's alumni forums. Headlines began to appear. Brooks' family coerces daughter to hand over property at sister's graduation. The discussions flared, not with pity for me, but with outrage at the brazen behavior of my parents. By the next morning, when I opened my company email, I found dozens of messages CC'd to both me and Jonathan. One major client of Brooks and Sons wrote, "We have just seen the circulating clip. The actions of Mr. and Mrs. Brooks make us question the transparency and ethics of our partnership. We are suspending our contract until an official explanation is provided." Another investor was more blunt. "We do not do business with people who treat their own children as tools and behave this way in public. The $5 million contract is officially terminated." Within just 24 hours, at least 3 major clients had walked away. Jonathan forwarded me a summary. Brooks and Sons has lost nearly 30% of its cash flow overnight. At the same time, social media erupted. The hashtag number Justice for Evelyn climbed into the top local trends. A professor from Sophie's University posted, "As parents, your role is to lift your children up, not to take from them." I witnessed this with my own eyes, and my heart breaks for Evelyn. The post was shared thousands of times. The Harvard Business Club alumni group in Philadelphia even featured the clip on their forum, discussing how traditional families often exploit the successful child to compensate for the golden child. Reading it, I felt both bitter and relieved. At last, what I had endured for years was being exposed. While I stayed silent, the community did the rest. A local newspaper quickly ran the headline, "Violence and Coercion at Graduation Party. The Brooks Family Scandal." The article described in detail how my mother slapped me, the sound amplified through the microphone, and Jonathan Hale's intervention. The story soon spread beyond Philadelphia, picked up by business news outlets under the angle, "When family drama threatens an entire company." That afternoon, I received a message from an old friend who had once worked at my father's firm. "Evelyn, the board is in chaos. They've been in emergency meetings since morning. Half the executives are demanding Richard step down temporarily." I sighed, not triumphant, but with the sense that a massive wheel had begun to turn, unstoppable by anyone. In Philadelphia, where my family had lived for decades, word of mouth spread faster than social media. Neighbors who once admired the Brooks family now whispered, "So the perfect facade was just an act." One of my mother's close friends, who always bragged about Carol having 2 wonderful daughters, now sneered. "One gets slapped in public, the other is spoiled into uselessness. What kind of family is that?" Every word cut into the very pride my parents valued most, the image of being a model family in the Philadelphia community. Jonathan sent me a detailed report late that night. His message was concise. 3 major contracts lost in 24 hours. 2 partners in Japan and Germany are demanding explanations this week. The board is preparing a no-confidence vote. You don't need to act. Public opinion has already done it for us. I sat by the hotel window, looking down at the city lights, and for the first time in years, I felt no burden to explain or prove myself. I was no longer Evelyn who kept silent to preserve family harmony. I was Evelyn who had been publicly defended, and this time, the truth was on my side. Meanwhile, Maya continued tracking the waves of social media. She called me, her voice low. The clip has passed 500,000 views. Women's rights groups, labor protection forums, they're all sharing it. "Evelyn, you've accidentally become a symbol for people who've been dismissed by their families." I gave a weary smile. I never meant to be a symbol. I just wanted to keep my home. Maya replied, "But people see their own stories reflected in yours, and that's where the power comes from." That same evening, a journalist called to request an interview. I declined, making it clear I didn't want to turn a family scandal into a spectacle. But I agreed to send a brief statement. Personal assets and hard-earned achievements are not bargaining chips for family theatrics. I believe everyone has the right to protect what they've built. That short message was published in the local paper and spread everywhere. While the public buzzed with outrage, the curtains at the Brooks estate stayed tightly drawn. A former housekeeper messaged me that my mother hadn't dared step outside all day, while my father fielded dozens of calls from partners and shareholders. His voice hoarse from trying to explain, but no one wanted to listen anymore. I pictured the scene, the man who once sat so confidently at the head of the table now hunched over in defeat, and the woman who had slapped her daughter to assert power now forced to face the condemnation of an entire community. And this was only the beginning. The domino effect had been set in motion. One slap on a rooftop had spiraled into a shockwave, shaking the company, the community, and the perfect family image they had tried to stage for decades. I returned to Boston. The early train carried me back to the harbor city, where glass towers caught the glow of the summer Sunday. I wanted to be in my own space again, within the soaring walls and windows of the penthouse, the one place I could breathe easily after everything that had happened. I hadn't even unpacked my suitcase when the phone began to ring relentlessly. Unknown numbers, the house line, and long texts from relatives. I ignored them all, settling onto the sofa and staring out at the deep blue sea beyond. By noon, the front desk called up. "Miss Brooks, there's a woman in the lobby claiming to be your mother. She wishes to come up." I froze, my fingers tightening around the phone. "No," I answered firmly. "Please tell her I'm not receiving visitors. If necessary, involve security." Minutes later, I received another call, this time from the building's head of security. His voice was steady and resolute. "Miss Brooks, we've explained to Mrs. Carroll that this is your private property. She cannot enter without your consent." I inhaled deeply, my chest heavy yet strangely light. At last, I had real boundaries and people to enforce them. Unlike all those years before, I no longer had to endure alone. But just an hour later, the front desk called again. "Mr. Richard Brooks is here to see you. He says he only needs 5 minutes to talk." I sat in silence for a long while. Of all people, I knew my father was the more pragmatic one, the one who usually recognized when it was time to stop. I agreed, but I insisted that security accompany him and that he be allowed upstairs only with a scheduled escort. 30 minutes later, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, I barely recognized him. Gone was the powerful man I'd grown up with. His hair was disheveled, his eyes sunken, his suit wrinkled as though he had slept in it. He stepped inside, hesitating, before finally blurting out, "Evelyn, I'm sorry." I sat on the sofa, keeping a careful distance, my gaze steady. "Sorry for what, Dad?" He sighed, his eyes darting away. "For that night. For what your mother did. We shouldn't have brought up the penthouse in front of everyone. But you know, our family has always expected a lot from you. You're strong, you're successful, and..." I cut him off, my voice firm. "No, Dad, the family hasn't expected things from me. The family has exploited me. From the very beginning, I've never been seen for who I am. When I earned a scholarship, you and Mom said I was just lucky. When I got promoted, you dismissed it with, 'She's just a woman, it doesn't matter.' And when I bought my first house, you both called it family property. Did you ever once ask what it cost me to achieve those things?" He stayed silent, lips pressed tight. I leaned back in the chair, my eyes drifting to the window, my voice slow but unwavering. "Do you know I once slept in the office for a week, surviving on instant noodles? Do you know I collapsed in a conference room from overwork? Do you know I stood alone negotiating deals worth tens of millions, with everyone waiting for me to stumble so they could push me aside? No one stood behind me. No one called to ask if I was all right. I got back up by myself, over and over again. And when I finally earned something, you and Mom decided you had the right to split it up, to hand it away like a decorative gift. My father lifted his eyes, the weight in them sinking deep. He opened his mouth, but I spoke first. This penthouse is mine. Not yours, not Mom's, not Sophie's, not the family's. It is mine, paid for with blood, sweat, and countless nights no one ever saw. And from this moment on, no one will ever force me to give it away. Silence stretched, broken only by the ticking of the clock. At last, my father exhaled heavily, his shoulders collapsing. I understand, perhaps. I've been wrong too many times. I met his gaze steadily, my voice even. Everyone makes mistakes. But remember this time, I will not let it slide. I've drawn my boundaries, and I will defend them. If you or Mom try to cross them again, you will face the consequences. I am no longer the daughter who stays silent out of fear of disgracing the family. He nodded, rising slowly, his eyes seeming 10 years older. Before reaching the door, he paused and murmured, I still hope one day we can talk as father and daughter, truly, but I know. Now is not that time. Then he left, leaving behind a heavy stillness in the apartment. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. Boston stretched beneath me, the seaport harbor shimmering in the sunlight. Pressing my hand to the cool glass, I whispered to myself, this is my boundary. And this time, no one, not even family, will ever cross it again. 48 hours after Jonathan's ultimatum, the Brooks family felt like a storm-ravaged house, chaos left in its wake. On the second morning, I woke to hundreds of notifications on my phone. On the official Brooks and Sons page, a letter of apology had been posted, signed by Richard Brooks. The wording was so precise I knew a lawyer's hand was behind it. I publicly apologized to my daughter, Evelyn Brooks, for the wrongful conduct at the recent graduation celebration. I acknowledge that the Boston Seaport penthouse is the lawful property of Evelyn, earned entirely through her own hard work. My family and I commit to ending all interference in her personal life and assets. We take full responsibility for the harm and loss of trust caused, and extend our apology to the community who witnessed the incident. Reading those lines, I felt a strange mix of emotions, pain and relief. Pain because it had taken an ultimatum and the weight of public outrage for my father to finally acknowledge what should have been obvious all along. Relief because, for the first time in my life, he publicly stood on the side of truth. I never asked for perfection, only for recognition. And now, I had it. My mother was different. On a personal social media account, she wrote a long post about a child's duty, about how modern society has poisoned the youth, turning them against their families. The community quickly struck back, and her post became proof of her lack of remorse. Comment after comment read, she's not apologizing, she's blaming. Now we understand why Evelyn needed boundaries. I read it, then closed my phone. I wasn't angry anymore. Only pity remained. Sophie, meanwhile, stayed silent for several days, until one afternoon when I received a message. Sister, I need to talk. I hesitated, but agreed to meet at a cafe near campus. Sophie walked in with swollen eyes and messy hair, no longer the girl shielded by the glow of family favoritism. She sat down, her hands trembling as she held a cappuccino. I've been thinking a lot. I know I've been given too much, while you were pushed aside. I didn't want to admit it, but maybe I need therapy. The way I depend on others, the way I thought everything belonged to me, it's not normal. I looked at her and, for the first time, saw honesty in her eyes. Sophie drew a deep breath, then hesitated before whispering, Thank you, sister. I've never called you that before, have I? Sister. One simple word, but it tightened my chest. I nodded, offering no promises, only saying, if you truly want to change, start with yourself. And to this. While my family spiraled into chaos, Brooks and Sons sank deeper into crisis. Major partners pulled out one after another. The Jersey Shore expansion project stalled for lack of capital. The board cut staff, slashed operations to barely half its former size. Richard Brooks, once a confident leader at the helm, was now only a frail shadow of himself, crushed under the weight of public outrage and pressure from his own company. Headlines ran, "Brooks and Sons scales back after family scandal." No one spoke of the firm as a symbol of prestige anymore. I, on the other hand, found myself stepping into a new chapter at the center of the storm. Jonathan Hale formally nominated me for the position of Senior Global Vice President. At the company meeting, he said plainly, "Evelyn has proven not only her management expertise but also her personal strength under extraordinary pressure. That is the quality we need." I sat at the table, listening quietly as applause filled the room for the first time. I felt recognition from a place that truly mattered. A week later, I accepted an invitation to speak at the Women in Leadership Forum in New York, where I shared not only about international trade, but also about the concept of boundaries in both family and career. I told the audience, success doesn't mean carrying the world on your shoulders. Sometimes, success is simply daring to say no when you're treated unfairly. And believe me, saying no to your family is the hardest of all. The applause that day didn't make me raise my head in pride. It grounded me, because I knew I had turned a bitter experience into a message for those who needed it. Soon, my inbox filled with emails from women everywhere. "Your story gave me the courage to tell my parents I can't keep paying off my brother's debts." Or, "Because of you, I finally walked away from a house where my parents controlled every dollar I earned." I read them and smiled, realizing I was no longer alone. One morning, as dawn painted the Boston Harbor in soft pink, I sat in the living room of my penthouse. Light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, spilling across the wooden table. On it lay the diamond earrings, those same earrings that had once fallen to the stone floor in the most humiliating moment of my life. I kept them there as a reminder. Some wounds become symbols, some slaps become beginnings. I touched one gently, exhaled, and looked out at the sky. And I spoke not just for myself, but for anyone listening. Blood ties give no one the right to cross your boundaries. What you've built is not a gift for others to hand out at will. You have the right to protect it, and more importantly, the right to protect yourself. If your family cannot respect that, remember this: you can build a family of your own with people who choose you and who honor you. Outside, Boston awakened in the glow of a new sunrise. I knew my journey wasn't over, but I had turned a page, living with boundaries firmly in place, and with the freedom I had fought so hard to claim.